The chandelier above the grand ballroom of Ashworth Manor held 1,000 candles. Each flame mirrored in tears Carenza refused to let fall. She stood frozen at the top of the marble staircase, her fingers still resting on the arm of the man she loved, the man who had promised her forever just 3 hours ago in the moonlit garden. The man who was now staring at the woman walking toward them with the same expression one might wear when watching a ship sink slowly into black water. The stranger was beautiful. Raven hair cascading over bare shoulders, a gown of deep crimson that clung to curves Carenza could never possess, and a smile that held the sharp edge of triumph. But it was not her beauty that stopped every voice in the ballroom, that turned 500 heads toward the staircase, that made Carenza's chest stutter and crack. It was her hand, resting deliberately, possessively, on the swell of her pregnant belly. Kaelin, the woman's voice carried across the sudden silence like poison poured into crystal. Did you think I wouldn't come? Did you think you could announce your engagement to another woman while I carry your heir? The words hit Carenza like a physical blow. She felt Kaelin's arm turn to stone beneath her fingertips, felt the sharp intake of his breath, saw the color drain from his face until he looked like a man carved from marble. Lavinia. His voice was hoarse, barely recognizable. What are you doing here? Not a denial, not confusion, recognition, fear. Carenza's world tilted sideways. The whispers began immediately, a susurrus of scandal spreading through the ballroom like wildfire through dry grass. She could feel the eyes on her, hungry and delighted at this spectacular humiliation. The Marquis of Pemberton's daughter raised her fan to hide her smile. Lord Cresswell leaned toward his wife with barely concealed glee. Even the servants had stopped moving, frozen in tableau with champagne flutes and silver trays. I'm doing what any woman would do, Lavinia continued, ascending the stairs with the grace of a predator who knew her prey was cornered. I'm claiming what's mine. Or, rather, what's ours? Her hand caressed her belly again, the gesture deliberate, obscene in its intimacy. Did you tell her about me, Kaelin? Did you tell your pretty little nobody about the nights we shared? About the promises you made? Carenza turned to look at him then, truly look at him, searching for the man who had held her in the garden and sworn she was his future, his everything. But that man was gone. In his place stood a stranger, jaw clenched, eyes wild with something that looked horribly like guilt. Kaelin. Her voice came out steady, though everything inside her was shattering. Tell me she's lying. He opened his mouth, closed it. His hand reached for her, but she stepped back as if his touch would burn. Carenza, please. It's not what you think. Let me explain. I never meant for me to find out? Lavinia's laugh was a cruel, tinkling thing. How romantic. Your Grace, the orchestra has stopped playing. Perhaps they're waiting for you to choose which woman you'll dance with tonight. The one you've been parading through society for weeks, or the one carrying your child. The room held its breath. Carenza felt something break inside her, and something that had been stitched together with promises and the memory of his lips on hers. She looked at Lavinia's triumphant smile, at Kaelin's stricken face, at the hundreds of witnesses who would dine on this scandal for months, and she made her choice. Her fingers released his arm. She stepped back once, twice, creating distance that felt like miles. When she spoke, her voice was clear enough to carry to every corner of the ballroom. I believe the lady has answered for you, Your Grace. I wish you both every happiness. Carenza, no, wait, you don't understand. But she was already turning, already descending the staircase on the opposite side, her borrowed silk gown whispering against marble like a final goodbye. She did not run. She would not give them that satisfaction. She walked with her spine straight and her chin high, even as she bled out with every step. Behind her, She heard Kaelin's voice calling her name, heard the commotion of him trying to follow, heard Lavinia's sharp command and the murmur of voices restraining him. But she did not look back. Looking back would destroy her. The night air hit her face like a benediction as she burst through the servants' entrance. Cold, clean, merciless. She had no carriage waiting, no coins in her reticule, no plan beyond escape. The woman who had arrived at this ball believing she would leave as a future duchess now stumbled into the darkness with nothing but the ruins of her dreams. She walked, past the manicured gardens, past the iron gates, past the carriages lined up with their bored drivers. She walked until the lights of Ashworth Manor were just aglow on the horizon, until her silk slippers were ruined and her feet bled, until the tears she had refused to shed finally broke free in great, racking sobs that bent her double on a country road in the middle of nowhere. She had loved him. God help her. She had loved him with everything she possessed. And it had all been a lie. When she finally straightened, wiping her face with torn silk gloves, Carenza Hale made a vow to the cold, indifferent stars. She would disappear. She would become no one, go nowhere he could find her, build a life so far from dukes and ballrooms and false promises that this night would become nothing but a distant nightmare. Kaelin Thorne would never find her. She would make certain of it. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that at that very moment, the Duke of Ashworth was tearing apart his own ballroom trying to reach her, that Lavinia's smile had begun to falter under his fury, that the truth was far more complicated than a pregnant mistress and a faithless lord. And she could not know that before the sun rose, he would discover her gone, and the search that followed would consume him entirely. The ballroom of Ashworth Manor had descended into chaos. Kaelin Thorne, the 8th Duke of Ashworth, stood in the center of it like a man watching his own execution. Guests clustered in horrified fascination. His grandmother, the Dowager Duchess Honoria, had risen from her seat with a face like thunder. And Lavinia Marchand stood 3 steps above him, her hand still resting on her belly, her expression flickering between triumph and something that looked almost like fear. Where is she?" Kaelin's voice cut through the whispers like a blade. "Where did she go?" "Your Grace, perhaps we should discuss this privately," his steward began. "I asked where she went." He was already moving toward the servants' entrance, shoving past guests who scrambled to clear his path. "Someone must have seen her. The carriages. Check the carriages." "Kaelin." Lavinia's voice followed him, sharp with warning. "You're making a scene. Think of your reputation." He spun to face her, and something in his expression made her step backward. "My reputation? You appear at my engagement ball, claim I fathered your child, and you speak to me of reputation? It's the truth. You know it's the truth. That fortnight in Brighton, when you thought no one would discover. Brighton was 8 months ago." His voice was low, dangerous. "And you were not pregnant when I ended things between us. You told me yourself there was no possibility." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Lavinia's perfect features. "Things change. Sometimes these matters aren't immediately apparent." "The timing is convenient, wouldn't you say?" The Dowager Duchess descended upon them like a vengeful deity, her silver hair immaculate, her eyes blazing. "My grandson announces his engagement, and suddenly you appear with claims that cannot be verified for months. Who sent you, girl? Who's paying for this spectacle?" "No one sent me. I came because I have rights. This child has rights. This child, if it exists at all, has nothing until proven otherwise." The Dowager turned to Kaelin. "Find the Hale girl. Find her now, before this scandal spreads beyond repair. I'll handle this creature." Kalen didn't need to be told twice. He was already running, propriety abandoned, his evening coat discarded somewhere behind him. Through the servants' corridors, past startled maids and wide-eyed footmen, out into the night, where the cold air seared his lungs. "Carenza!" Her name tore from his throat. "Carenza!" The gardens answered with silence. The stables held only confused grooms who swore no one had taken a horse. The gate guards reported a woman walking toward the main road perhaps 20 minutes past, but she had refused their offer of assistance, had not even turned when they called after her. 20 minutes. She had 20 minutes on him, alone in the darkness, dressed for a ballroom, with nothing and no one to protect her. Kalen commandeered a horse and rode into the night like a man possessed. He searched every road, every lane, every path she might have taken. He called her name until his voice broke. He rode until his horse was lathered and stumbling, until dawn began to stain the eastern sky with colors that mocked him with their beauty. He did not find her. When he finally returned to Ashworth Manor, hollow-eyed, his steward met him with news that turned his blood to ice. "We've made inquiries, Your Grace. Miss Hale did not return to her family's lodgings. Her mother and brother have heard nothing. Her father is too ill to be questioned further. It's as if she simply—" The man hesitated. "Vanished." "People don't vanish." "No, Your Grace. But people who wish to disappear can make themselves very difficult to find." Kalen sank into a chair in his study, still wearing his muddied evening clothes, still seeing Carenza's face in the moment before she'd turned away. The trust crumbling into devastation, the love curdling into something that looked like hate. The woman, Lavinia. Where is she? The Dowager Duchess had her removed to the East Wing. She's being questioned. And her claims. The steward shifted uncomfortably. She maintains her story, Your Grace. But there are inconsistencies. The physician who examined her expressed certain doubts about the timing. The Dowager believes. I don't care what anyone believes. Kalen's fist slammed against his desk. I care about finding Carenza. I care about explaining. I care about making her understand that whatever happened with Lavinia was over before I ever met her. That I ended things months ago. That this child, if there even is a child, thought cannot possibly be mine. Then why did you hesitate, Your Grace? In the ballroom, when Miss Hale asked you to deny it? The question hung in the air like smoke. Kalen closed his eyes. Because I was a coward. Because seeing Lavinia there, hearing her accusations, I panicked. I thought of the scandal, the complications, the 1,000 ways this could shatter everything. And in that moment of hesitation, I lost the only woman I've ever truly loved. Then we'll find her, Your Grace. Yes. Kalen opened his eyes, and something had hardened in them. Something cold and determined and utterly relentless. We will find her. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care what it costs. I will tear apart every village, every town, every corner of this country until I find her. He rose, exhaustion forgotten, grief transformed into purpose. Send word to every contact we have. Hire investigators, offer rewards, do whatever it takes. And Lavinia, his jaw tightened. Keep her comfortable but watched. If she's lying about this child, I want to know. And if someone put her up to this, I want to know that too. And if Miss Hale doesn't wish to be found, Your Grace? Kalen moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. When he spoke, his voice held the weight of a vow. Then I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm worth being found for. He didn't know then that Carenza was already 30 miles away, hidden in a farmer's cart, heading toward a new life under a false name. Or that finding her would take far longer than he could imagine. 6 weeks earlier, the first time Kalen Thorne saw Carenza Hale, she was arguing with a horse. He had been riding through the village of Wrenbury, attending to a tedious matter of tenant disputes, when the sound of a woman's voice raised in exasperated negotiation drew his attention to the coaching inn stable yard. "Listen to me, you obstinate creature. The carriage is perfectly safe. The wheel has been repaired. There is absolutely no reason for this theatrical display of cowardice." The horse, a dappled gray mare with intelligent eyes, responded by refusing to move a single inch toward the waiting carriage. "I've seen more fortitude from cats, from elderly cats who are also blind." Kalen found himself smiling before he realized it. The woman was slender, dark-haired, dressed in a traveling gown of modest blue that had seen better years. She was clearly not wealthy, not titled, not anyone he should notice. But there was something in the way she stood, hands on hips, addressing the horse as an equal adversary, that made it impossible to look away. "Perhaps," he said, guiding his horse closer, "the mare objects to being insulted." The woman turned, and Kalen felt the world shift beneath him. She was beautiful, yes, but not in the way of the porcelain debutantes who filled London ballrooms. Hers was a beauty that lived in the sharp intelligence of hazel eyes, in the determined set of a stubborn jaw, in the flush of embarrassment that crept across her cheeks as she realized she'd been observed. "I wasn't insulting her," she said, recovering quickly. "I was motivating her. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Certainly. Insults are intended to wound. Motivation is intended to produce action." She gestured at the immobile horse. "Admittedly, the results have been similar." Kalen dismounted, approaching the mare slowly. "May I?" The woman stepped aside, watching with curiosity as he murmured to the horse, running his hand along her neck, checking the way she held her weight. After a moment, he crouched to examine her front hoof. "Stone bruise," he said. "Recent, but painful. She's not being cowardly. She's telling you she's hurt." The woman's expression shifted from skepticism to concern, to something that looked like shame. "I didn't realize. I thought she was simply being difficult." "Most creatures are difficult for reasons. Finding those reasons is usually more effective than motivation." She knelt beside him, examining the hoof he indicated, and Kalen caught the scent of lavender and something sweeter, something that made him want to lean closer. "You know horses well," she said. "I know that most problems have causes, and most causes have solutions." He rose, offering his hand to help her up. "You'll need to rest her for a day or two. The inn here is decent enough." "I don't have a day or two." But she took his hand, and the touch of her fingers through worn gloves sent an unexpected jolt through him. "I'm expected in Ashworth for a position. If I'm late, the post may go to someone else." "What sort of position?" "Companion to the Dowager Duchess." She smiled ruefully. "Not glamorous, but beggars and second daughters cannot be choosers." Kalen felt something twist in his chest. The Dowager Duchess was his grandmother. This woman, this captivating, horse-arguing, lavender-scented woman, was coming to his home. "I believe," he said slowly, "I may be able to help with your transportation difficulty." "You have a spare horse that tolerates insults?" "Better. I have a carriage heading to Ashworth this very afternoon." He paused, knowing he should introduce himself, knowing the moment he did, everything would change. "I'm traveling there myself." "That's remarkably convenient." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Suspiciously convenient, one might say." "One might. Or one might simply accept that fate occasionally arranges things favorably." She studied him for a long moment, and Kalen had the uncomfortable sensation of being measured and assessed by someone who saw far more than he intended to show. "Very well," she said finally. "But I should warn you, I'm told I'm terrible company on long journeys. I ask too many questions and have opinions on everything. I consider myself warned." He didn't tell her who he was, not then. Let her discover it when they arrived, he told himself. Let her have these hours of treating him like an ordinary man. It was the most selfish decision he'd ever made, and the one he would never regret. They talked for the entire journey, about books and philosophy, about the price of bread and the state of the roads, about her family's fallen fortunes and his love of astronomy. She made him laugh, genuinely laugh, for the first time since his father's death 2 years prior. She challenged his opinions and defended her own with a ferocity that left him breathless. By the time the carriage reached Ashworth Manor, Caelan Thorne knew 3 things with absolute certainty. First, Carenza Hale was unlike anyone he had ever met. Second, she would be furious when she discovered his identity. Third, he was going to marry her. Scandal and society, and his grandmother's plans be damned. The fury came first, of course, a spectacular display that occurred in his grandmother's sitting room within minutes of their arrival, when the Dowager addressed him as "Your Grace," and Carenza realized she had spent 4 hours sharing her most honest thoughts with the man who would be her employer's grandson. "You lied to me. I omitted. There is no difference. You told me yourself there's a difference between insults and motivation. That was about horses. The principle holds." She had threatened to leave, declared she couldn't possibly work in a household where she'd been made a fool of, and announced that dukes who deceived women on public roads were precisely the sort of aristocrats who made revolution seem reasonable. His grandmother had watched the entire exchange with barely concealed delight. "I like her," the Dowager had said when Carenza finally stormed out. "She has spine. Don't ruin this, Caelan." He hadn't ruined it. He had courted her slowly, carefully, proving himself worthy of her trust, one conversation at a time. He had sought her out in the library and the gardens, had arranged for her favorite books to appear on her bedside table, had listened when she spoke of her fears and dreams and the weight of keeping her family afloat. And she had let him in. Gradually, reluctantly, then all at once. The first time he kissed her, in the greenhouse during a rainstorm, she had pulled back and searched his face as if looking for the lie. "I'm not him," he had said. "I'm not whoever taught you that men can't be trusted. Give me a chance to show you." She had given him that chance, had given him everything. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of falling so deeply in love that he couldn't remember who he'd been before her. 6 weeks of planning a future, of imagining children with her eyes and her stubbornness, of believing that fate had finally given him something good. And then Lavinia had appeared, and he had hesitated, and everything had shattered. Present-day Caelan sat in his study, holding the letter Carenza had left behind, the only trace of her that remained. "I believed you. That was my mistake. I won't make it again." 12 words. 12 words that had carved themselves into his chest and refused to stop bleeding. Somewhere out there, the woman he loved was hiding from him, convinced he had betrayed her in the worst possible way. And she had no idea that he would burn down the world to find her again. The village of Thornhaven sat at the edge of the world, or so it seemed to Carenza. 6 weeks of running had brought her here, to this windswept fishing community, where the cliffs dropped sharply into churning gray waters, and the nearest grand estate was 40 miles distant. No one here had heard of the Duke of Ashworth. No one here cared about London scandals, or broken engagements, or women who fled ballrooms in borrowed silk. Here, she was simply Marin Wynne, a widow from the south, seeking quiet work and a place to mend. The lie had come easier than expected, and a dead husband explained her mourning clothes, purchased cheaply from a traveling peddler. A vague tragedy in her past excused her reluctance to speak of it, and the worn gold band she'd bought for 3 shillings gave her the respectability that unmarried women traveling alone could never possess. She had found lodging with a widow named Bronwyn Hargrave, a weathered woman of 60 who ran a small boarding house and asked no questions beyond whether Carenza could pay weekly in advance. "I don't care where you came from or what you're running from," Bronwyn had said on that first night, setting a bowl of fish stew before her. "Half the people in Thornhaven are running from something. The sea doesn't judge, and neither do I." It was the closest thing to kindness Carenza had received since the night her world ended. She found work at the village's only bookshop, a cramped establishment run by an elderly man named Aldous Whitmore, who was going blind and needed someone to read aloud to him while he organized his inventory. The pay was pitiful, barely enough to cover her lodging and food, but it kept her mind occupied during the daylight hours. The nights were harder. In the darkness of her small rented room, with the sound of waves crashing against the cliffs below, Carenza could not escape her memories. Kaelin's face when he first saw Lavinia, the way his arm had turned to stone beneath her fingers, the terrible, damning hesitation when she had begged him to deny it. "Tell me she's lying." He hadn't. That was the truth she returned to again and again, the wound she couldn't stop pressing. He hadn't denied it, hadn't said the child wasn't his, hadn't fought for her in that crucial moment when fighting was all that mattered. Instead, he had let her walk away. Some nights, she dreamed of the greenhouse, of rain on glass and his hands in her hair, and the way he had looked at her like she was worth protecting. She would wake with tears on her cheeks and an ache in her chest that no amount of sea air could cure. But gradually, painfully, she began to build something new. Aldous Whitmore turned out to be a font of wisdom disguised as a grumpy bookseller. He had traveled the world in his youth, had loved and lost and survived, and he dispensed his hard-won knowledge between complaints about his failing eyesight and the rising cost of paper. "Grief is like the tide," he told her one afternoon, as she read to him from a volume of maritime poetry. "It comes and goes. Some days it's gentle, lapping at your ankles. Other days it knocks you flat and tries to drag you under. The trick is learning to swim. And if you can't swim, then you float. You hold your breath and trust that eventually you'll wash up somewhere solid." He turned his clouded eyes toward her with uncanny accuracy. "You're doing the floating part. The solid ground will come." She wanted to believe him. Bronwyn Hargrave contributed her own form of rough comfort, putting Carenza to work in the boarding house garden, claiming she needed help with the vegetables. But Carenza suspected the woman simply understood that idle hands made for a restless mind, and that there was healing to be found in the simple act of coaxing life from soil. "My husband left me for a barmaid in Plymouth," Bronwyn said one evening, as they shelled peas together on the back porch. 23 years of marriage, 4 children, and he walked out the door like I was a coat he'd outgrown. She shrugged her broad shoulders. "I thought I'd die from the shame of it. But here I am, 30 years later, with my own house and my own money, and a life I built with my own 2 hands. Do you ever miss him? Sometimes. Mostly I miss who I thought he was. The real man was a stranger wearing my husband's face." Bronwyn's weathered hands never paused in their work. "That's the hardest part, isn't it? Realizing you loved someone who never existed." Carenza said nothing, but something in her chest loosened. Perhaps that was the truth she needed to accept. The Kaelin she had loved, the one who had courted her with books and starlight and patient devotion, had never been real. The real Kaelin was the one who had kept a mistress, who had fathered a child with another woman, who had let her walk into humiliation without a word of warning. She needed to mourn the fiction and move forward. But late at night, when the waves sang their endless song against the cliffs, Carenza couldn't quite convince herself to stop wondering. What she didn't know was that at that very moment, 500 miles away, a man who hadn't slept in 6 weeks was staring at a map covered in red marks, each one representing another place she wasn't, and his determination was just beginning. "You look like death warmed over and served cold." Kalen didn't bother to lift his head from the map spread across his study desk. "Thank you, grandmother. Your compassion, as always, it was overwhelming." The Dowager Duchess Honoria swept into the room with the imperious grace that had terrified 3 generations of the Thorne family. At 72, she remained as sharp as a blade and twice as cutting. She settled into the chair across from him without invitation and studied her grandson with eyes that missed nothing. "It's been 6 weeks, Kalen. 6 weeks of investigators and rewards and chasing shadows across half of England. You've neglected your estates, ignored your parliamentary duties, and aged 10 years. She paused. "When do you intend to stop this madness?" "When I find her." "And if she doesn't wish to be found?" Kalen's hand tightened on his pen until the wood creaked. "Then I'll find her anyway. I'll explain. I'll make her understand." "Understand what?" "So precisely." The Dowager's voice was deceptively mild. "That you kept a mistress before you met her. That you handled Lavinia's appearance with all the grace of a startled sheep. That you let the woman you supposedly love walk into the night alone and unprotected while you stood there gaping." Each word landed like a blow. Kalen finally raised his head, and the Dowager felt a flicker of something that might have been concern. Her grandson's face was gaunt, shadowed, his eyes holding an edge that frightened her more than she would ever admit. "I know what I did," he said quietly. "I know I failed her. But I also know I love her, and I know the truth about Lavinia's claims. Doesn't Carenza deserve to hear that truth before she condemns me forever?" "Ah, yes. Lavinia." The Dowager's expression hardened. "The physician has confirmed what I suspected. The timing of her pregnancy makes your paternity impossible. The child was conceived at least 2 months after your liaison ended." Something flickered in Kalen's eyes. "You're certain?" "Quite certain. Lavinia has admitted as much under questioning. The father is a married baronet who refused to acknowledge her, so she concocted this scheme to secure herself a wealthier protector." The Dowager's lip curled with contempt. "She's been removed from the estate. I've ensured she'll find no welcome in any respectable house in England." "Then I can tell Carenza. You can tell her nothing if you cannot find her." The Dowager leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "Which brings me to my actual purpose in this conversation. I've come to determine whether you're worthy of finding her at all." Kalen stared at her. "I beg your pardon? You heard me." She settled back, folding her hands in her lap with the air of a magistrate preparing to pass judgment. "I liked that girl. She had more spine in her smallest finger than most of the simpering debutantes you've been paraded before. She would have made an excellent duchess, and more importantly, she would have made you happy." "She did make me happy." Past tense. And whose fault is that? The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. "Mine," Kalen said hoarsely. "It was my fault." "Was it? Explain." He pushed back from his desk, running both hands through hair that hadn't seen proper attention in weeks. "I should have told her about Lavinia. From the beginning. I should have explained that there had been someone before her, that it was over, that it meant nothing." "Why didn't you?" "Because I was ashamed." The admission came out rough, torn from somewhere deep. Lavinia wasn't like Carenza. She was a diversion, a distraction from grief after father died. I'm not proud of it, and I didn't want Carenza to look at me and see that weakness. "So you protected your pride at the cost of her trust?" "Yes." The Dowager nodded slowly. "What else?" "In the ballroom, when Lavinia appeared, I should have denied it immediately. I should have called her a liar in front of everyone. Consequences be damned. Instead, I froze. I thought about scandal and complications and what people would say, and in those few seconds of cowardice, I lost everything. You thought about yourself. Yes, his voice cracked. I thought about myself when I should have been thinking only of her. Silence fell between them, heavy with judgment and something like approval. One more question, the Dowager said finally. If you find her, and she refuses to forgive you, what then? Kalen met his grandmother's eyes directly. Then I'll accept her decision. I'll ensure she's protected and provided for, regardless of whether she wants anything to do with me. I'll spend the rest of my life regretting my failures, but I won't force myself on a woman who doesn't want me, even if it shatters you. Especially then. Carenza deserves a man who puts her needs above his own. I failed at that once. I won't fail again, even if respecting her choice means living without her. The Dowager studied him for a long moment, reading something in his face that seemed to satisfy her. Then, slowly, she reached into her reticule and withdrew a folded piece of paper. My investigator found this yesterday, she said, extending it toward him. A woman matching Carenza's description has been seen in a fishing village called Thornhaven, on the northern coast. She's calling herself Marin Wynn and working in a bookshop. Kalen's hand trembled as he took the paper. You've known since yesterday? I needed to be certain you deserved this information. The Dowager rose, her silk skirts rustling. You've convinced me, barely. But hear me well, Kalen. If you find that girl and cause her one more moment of pain through your carelessness or cowardice, I will personally ensure you regret it for the remainder of your days. I understand. Do you? She paused at the door, mine looking back at him with an expression that softened fractionally. She loved you, genuinely, deeply, against her better judgment. That kind of love is rare, and you squandered it. Don't squander the second chance you don't deserve. She left, and Kalen stared at the paper in his hands. Thornhaven. Marin Wynn. A bookshop. 6 weeks of nothing, and now he knew where she was. He should prepare properly. Rest, clean himself up, plan what he would say. Approach this with the careful strategy it deserved. Instead, he was calling for his horse within minutes, riding north before the sun had fully set, driven by a need that refused to wait another moment. Carenza was alive. Carenza was findable, and God help him, he would not waste this chance. The road to Thornhaven was long, and Kalen's mind filled the empty hours with memories he couldn't escape. 5 weeks earlier, the library at Ashworth Manor had always been his sanctuary, but lately it had become something else entirely. A place of ambush, of unexpected encounters that left him breathless. He found her there again, curled in the window seat with a book larger than her lap, completely absorbed in whatever world the pages contained. Late afternoon light turned her dark hair to burnished copper and caught the faint smile on her lips as she read. She hadn't noticed him yet. He could have retreated, preserved the proper distance that should exist between a duke and his grandmother's companion. Could have remembered his obligations, his position, the scandal that would erupt if anyone suspected his feelings. Instead, he stepped closer. Herodotus? He tilted his head to read the spine. Heavy reading for a Tuesday afternoon. Carenza startled, nearly dropping the massive volume. Your Grace, I didn't hear you come in. Clearly. You were entirely elsewhere. He settled into the chair across from her, abandoning all pretense of having somewhere else to be. What's captured your attention so thoroughly? The Persian Wars. She stroked the page almost reverently. I've read summaries before, but never the actual account. Your library is extraordinary. My father spent 40 years building it. He believed books were the only truly worthwhile inheritance. Kalen smiled at the memory. He used to say that titles and fortunes could be lost, but knowledge, once gained, could never be taken away. He sounds like a wise man. He was? I miss him terribly. The admission came out before he could stop it, more honest than he ever allowed himself to be. Carenza's expression softened. How long has he been gone? 2 years. Though sometimes it feels like yesterday, and other times it feels like a lifetime. He looked away, uncomfortable with his own vulnerability. Forgive me. I don't usually speak of such things. Why not? Because dukes don't have feelings. We have duties and obligations and a great deal of paperwork. But feelings are considered rather déclasse. She laughed, and the sound went through him like sunlight through glass. That's absurd. Most things about aristocratic life are absurd. We simply pretend otherwise because admitting the truth would require changing things. And you don't want change? Kaelin met her eyes, and something passed between them that neither could name. I'm beginning to think I want it very much. The moment stretched, charged with possibility. Then footsteps sounded in the corridor, and they both retreated to safer ground, speaking of books and weather, and nothing of consequence. But that night, Kaelin lay awake for hours, thinking of hazel eyes and unexpected laughter, and the way she had looked at him when he spoke of his father, like he was a person, not a title or a fortune or a catch to be landed. Just a man, missing someone he loved. 4 weeks earlier, he found her in the greenhouse during a rainstorm, which was how he would always think of it afterward. The rain, the glass, the way the light turned everything silver and green. She was examining an orchid with the focused attention she brought to everything, unaware of his presence until he spoke. That one's dying. She didn't startle this time. Perhaps she was growing accustomed to his tendency to appear wherever she happened to be. I know. I thought perhaps I could save it. The gardener tried for weeks. It refuses to cooperate. Maybe it needs different care than the gardener was offering. She touched a withered leaf gently. Living things don't always thrive under standard conditions. Is that philosophy or horticulture? Both. She turned to face him, and rain hammered against the glass walls, enclosing them in their own private world. What are you doing here, Your Grace? Kaelin. That's not an answer. It's my name. I'd like you to use it. He moved closer, drawn by a force he had stopped trying to resist. And I'm here because you're here. That seems to be a pattern I cannot break. Cannot, or will not. Does it matter? She held his gaze, and he watched the struggle play out across her face. The warnings she was telling herself. The propriety she knew she should maintain. The wanting she couldn't quite hide. I'm not a toy for bored aristocrats, she said quietly. I have nothing to offer a man like you. No fortune, no connections, no family of significance. Pursuing me can only end badly for one of us, and we both know which one. What if I don't care about any of that? Then you're a fool. Possibly. He reached out, slowly enough that she could retreat, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. But I'm a fool who cannot stop thinking about you. A fool who counts the hours until our next conversation. A fool who has finally found someone who makes him feel alive after 2 years of merely existing. Her breath caught. Kaelin. It was the first time she'd used his name, and it undid him completely. He kissed her. Softly at first, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But she didn't pull away. Her hands came up to grip his lapels, and she kissed him back with a fervor that matched his own, and the rain sang against the glass, and nothing else mattered. When they finally parted, both breathing hard, she searched his face with those devastating hazel eyes. This is a mistake. Probably. We'll regret it. Possibly. Your grandmother will have me dismissed. My grandmother will be planning our wedding within the fortnight. She likes you far better than she likes me." He cradled her face in his hands, memorizing every detail. "Oh, give me a chance, Carenza. Let me show you that this is real. Let me prove that you deserve everything I can offer, not despite who you are, but because of it. I don't know if I can trust. I know." He pressed his forehead to hers. "I know trust is difficult. I know you've been hurt before, that you've learned to protect yourself, that letting someone in feels like handing them a weapon. But I'm not him. Whoever taught you that love is dangerous, I'm not him. Give me the chance to show you." She was silent for so long that he thought she would refuse. Then, slowly, her hands released his lapels and slid up to his shoulders, pulling him closer. "One chance," she whispered. "Don't waste it." He had sworn he wouldn't. Present. The memory faded as Kalen's horse crested a hill, and in the distance, he saw the gray smudge of the sea and the scattered lights of a village clinging to the cliffs. Thornhaven. She was there, somewhere in those narrow streets, living under a false name, working in a bookshop, trying to forget he existed. And he had wasted his chance so spectacularly that he had no right to ask for another. But he was going to ask anyway, because the alternative was a lifetime without her, and he had already learned that such a life wasn't worth living. He urged his horse forward into the gathering darkness, carrying with him the memory of rain on glass and a woman who had trusted him with her carefully guarded soul. He had broken that trust, shattered it so thoroughly that he still found shards of it embedded in his chest with every breath. Now he had to find a way to earn it back, or accept that some mistakes could never be forgiven. Thornhaven greeted Kalen with suspicion. He had expected as much. A stranger arriving in a small fishing village, asking questions about a woman who clearly didn't want to be found, would naturally raise defenses. What he hadn't expected was the wall of absolute silence that met his every inquiry. "Marin Wynn?" The innkeeper wiped a glass with deliberate slowness. "Don't know anyone by that name." "A dark-haired woman, late 20s, working at the bookshop. She arrived perhaps 6 weeks ago. Lot of people pass through Thornhaven. Can't be expected to remember everyone." "I'm willing to pay for information." The innkeeper's eyes hardened. "And I'm willing to tell you that money doesn't buy everything in this village. If a woman came here wanting to be left alone, we respect that, especially from fancy gentlemen who arrive asking questions." Kalen's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to remain calm. Intimidation would get him nowhere. These people were protecting Carenza, which meant they cared about her, which meant she had built something here worth protecting. That knowledge was both comforting and devastating. He took a room at the inn, deciding to approach the problem differently. If no one would tell him where she was, he would find her himself. The village was small. She couldn't hide forever. But 3 days passed, and he saw no sign of her. He walked every street, visited every shop, lingered near the bookshop that his grandmother's investigator had mentioned. The elderly proprietor, a man with clouded eyes, who introduced himself as Aldous Whitmore, proved as unhelpful as everyone else. "I work alone," the old man said, though his hands trembled slightly, in a way that suggested he was lying. "Have for years. No assistance, no help. Just me and my books. I was told a woman named Marin Wynn worked here. You were told wrong." Kalen wanted to shake the truth out of him, but something in the old man's protective stance stopped him. This was someone who cared about Carenza, who was shielding her from a threat he didn't understand. "I'm not here to hurt her," Kalen said quietly. "I'm here to explain, to apologize, to tell her the truth about what happened." Aldous' clouded eyes seemed to see right through him. "Truth is a funny thing, young man. People use it like a weapon when it suits them, and hide it when it doesn't. How do I know your truth isn't just another blade aimed at someone who's already bleeding? You don't. but I'm asking you to give me a chance to demonstrate it." The old man was silent for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly. "Even if I knew this woman you're seeking, which I don't, I wouldn't tell you where she was. Some hurts run too deep for explanations. Some truths come too late to matter." Kalen left the shop with despair clawing at his chest. On the fourth day, everything changed. He was sitting in the inn's common room, nursing an ail he didn't want, and planning his next move, when a commotion erupted near the entrance. A coach had arrived, an expensive one that looked wildly out of place in this humble village. And stepping out of it, while resplendent in traveling clothes that cost more than most Thornhaven residents earned in a year, was his grandmother. "Before you say anything," the Dowager Duchess announced, sweeping into the inn like she owned it, "I'm not here because I doubt your abilities. I'm here because I have information that couldn't wait." "Grandmother, what, not here?" She glanced around the common room, where every eye had fixed upon her with naked curiosity. "Is there somewhere private we can speak?" Minutes later, in Kalen's cramped room above the inn, the Dowager withdrew a sheaf of papers from her traveling case. "Lavinia talked," she said without preamble. "Once she realized I had evidence of her deception, she confessed everything. The pregnancy, the scheme, who put her up to it?" Kalen's blood ran cold. Someone put her up to it. Lord Cresswell. The name fell like a hammer blow. "It seems he's been nursing a grudge against our family, since your father outbid him for the Thornbury estate 15 years ago. When he learned of your engagement, he saw an opportunity for revenge. Cresswell hired Lavinia to ruin my relationship with Carenza. He discovered your past liaison with her and offered her a substantial sum to appear at your engagement ball with claims of pregnancy. The timing, the public humiliation, the specific words she used, all of it was choreographed to inflict maximum damage." Kalen sat down heavily on the bed, his mind reeling. "The child belongs to a clerk in Cresswell's own household. Lavinia was with child by a man who refused to acknowledge her, and Cresswell offered her enough money to start over somewhere new. And all she had to do was destroy your happiness first. And she agreed. She agreed." The Dowager's voice held cold fury. "I've ensured that Cresswell will pay for this. His reputation, his standing in society, his precious seat in Parliament. All of it will crumble. But that's not why I came." She handed him one of the papers. "This is a signed confession from Lavinia, detailing every aspect of the scheme, witnessed by my solicitor and a magistrate. Irrefutable evidence that her claims against you were false." Kalen stared at the document, relief and anguish warring in his chest. "Carenza needs to see this, needs to understand that you were as much a victim of this scheme as she was." The Dowager's expression softened marginally. "You made mistakes, Kalen. Your hesitation, your failure to deny immediately, those failures are yours to own. But the core accusation, the thing that drove her away, that was a lie constructed by your enemies. Will she believe it? That depends entirely on you." The Dowager moved toward the door. "I've done what I can. The rest is in your hands. Find her, show her this evidence, and pray that love is stronger than pain." She paused at the threshold. "And Kalen, don't waste this chance. You may not get another." After she left, Kalen sat alone with Lavinia's confession, reading it over and over until the words blurred. He had been manipulated, used as a pawn in someone else's game of revenge, and Carenza had suffered for it. But knowing the truth wasn't enough. He had to make her believe it, had to find a way to reach her, to explain, and to demonstrate that the love they'd shared wasn't built on lies. Tomorrow he would search again, and this time he wouldn't stop until he found her. What he didn't know was that Carenza had seen his grandmother's coach arrive, had recognized the Ashworth crest on its door, had realized, with sickening certainty, that Kaelin was here in Thornhaven, hunting for her, and she was already planning to run again. Carenza moved through Aldous' bookshop like a ghost, shoving her few possessions into a worn traveling bag, while the old man watched with sorrowful eyes. "You could stay," he said gently. "Face him. Hear what he has to say." "I've heard enough." Her hands trembled as she wrapped the single book she'd allowed herself to keep, a volume of poetry she'd purchased with her first week's wages. "So I've heard promises and explanations and beautiful words that turned out to mean nothing. I won't be fooled again. And if he's telling the truth, if there's more to the story than you know, then he should have told me before. He should have trusted me with the truth when it mattered, not chased me across England to deliver it after the damage was done." She closed her bag with finality. "I survived losing him once. I'll survive it again. Surviving isn't the same as living, child." The words struck deeper than she wanted to admit, but she couldn't afford to listen, couldn't afford to wonder. That was a luxury for people who hadn't learned how quickly it could be crushed. "Thank you for everything," she said, embracing the old man briefly. "You've been kinder to me than I deserved." "Nonsense. You deserve far more kindness than the world has given you." He pressed something into her hand, a few coins, more than she'd earned in her weeks of work. "Take this. And remember, running from pain is understandable. But sometimes, the most difficult thing is standing still." She left through the back entrance, moving quickly through the narrow alleys toward the coaching inn on the village's edge. A mail coach departed for the south at noon. She could be 50 miles away before Kaelin realized she was gone. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. She rounded a corner and nearly collided with him. For one frozen moment, they stared at each other. Kaelin looked terrible, unshaven, exhausted, his usually immaculate appearance abandoned. But his eyes, those devastating blue eyes, burned with an intensity that stole her breath. "Carenza!" Her name was a prayer on his lips. "Please, don't run." She took a step backward. "How did you find me?" "My grandmother's investigators. But it doesn't matter how. What matters is that I'm here, that I need to explain." "There's nothing to explain." She hated the way her voice shook. "I saw everything I needed to see at that ballroom. Your mistress, her pregnancy, your silence when I begged you to deny it. The child isn't mine. Of course you'd say that now. It's the truth." He reached into his coat, withdrawing a folded paper. "Lavinia confessed. The whole thing was a scheme orchestrated by Lord Cresswell to ruin me. The child belongs to someone else. She was paid to lie, to time her appearance for maximum humiliation, and to say exactly the words that would drive you away." Carenza stared at the paper he extended toward her, afraid to take it, afraid of what it might mean if she did. "I don't believe you." "Then read this. It's her signed confession, witnessed by a magistrate. Every detail of the scheme laid bare." His voice cracked. "I was a fool, Carenza. I should have told you about Lavinia from the beginning. I should have denied her accusations immediately instead of freezing like a coward. Those mistakes are mine, and I'll carry the shame of them forever. But I never betrayed you. I never touched her after we met. The woman I love has only ever been you." The words hung between them, fragile as glass. Carenza's hand moved toward the confession, trembling. But before her fingers could close around it, a shout echoed from the main street. "There. That's the gentleman who's been asking questions." Kaelin turned toward the sound. 3 fishermen were approaching, their expressions hostile. Behind them came Bronwyn Hargrave, Carenza's landlady, her weathered face set in protective determination. "This man bothering you, Marin?" Bronwyn demanded. The use of her false name snapped Carenza back to reality. These people had protected her, sheltered her, asked no questions while she mended. They thought they were defending her from a threat. And perhaps they were. "I'm fine," she heard herself say. He was just leaving. Kaylin's face twisted with anguish. "Carenza, please. My name is Marin." The lie tasted like ash. "And I don't know this man." "You heard her." The largest fisherman stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "Time for you to go. St. Fancy Lord." "I'm not leaving without—" "Yes," Carenza said, and her voice could have frozen the sea. "You are." She turned her back on him and walked away. Each step felt like tearing off a piece of her own skin. She could hear him calling her name, hear the scuffle as the villagers prevented him from following, hear the anguish in his voice that matched the anguish in her soul. But she didn't look back. Looking back would shatter what remained of her. She made it to Bronwyn's boarding house before her legs gave out, collapsed against the garden wall, sliding down until she sat in the dirt, the confession she hadn't taken burning a hole in her imagination. What if it was true? What if she'd just walked away from evidence that everything she believed was wrong? But what if it was another manipulation? Another beautiful lie designed to draw her back into his orbit, only to be ruined again? She couldn't risk it. Couldn't survive another betrayal. Better to run. Better to disappear. Better to spend the rest of her life wondering than to trust and be broken beyond repair. But as she sat there in the fading light, Carenza realized with devastating clarity that running hadn't helped at all. She still loved him. And that love was going to consume her either way. Kaylin did not leave Thornhaven. The fisherman had escorted him firmly back to the inn, warning him that further pursuit would be met with less gentle persuasion. But he simply paid for another week's lodging, planted himself in the common room, and waited. If Carenza wanted him gone, she would have to tell him herself. Not through intermediaries. Not through lies about not knowing him, face to face, with the truth laid bare between them. But she didn't come. Days passed. He barely slept, barely ate, barely existed. He wrote letters to her, long, rambling confessions that explained everything about Lavinia, about Cresswell, about his own failures, and left them with Aldous Whitmore, who accepted them silently, without promising to deliver them. He walked the cliffs at dawn, watching the waves crash against rocks below, and wondering if this was what his father had felt after losing his mother. This hollow, consuming grief that made every breath an effort. On the 5th day, Bronwyn Hargrave found him sitting on a bench overlooking the harbor, staring at nothing. "You're still here," she said, settling beside him without invitation. "I told you I wouldn't leave. Most men would have given up by now. Most men didn't ruin the best thing that ever happened to them through cowardice and silence." He laughed bitterly. "I have no right to her forgiveness. I know that. But I can't leave without at least trying to earn it." Bronwyn studied him for a long moment. "She reads your letters." Kaylin's pulse lurched. "She does?" "Every night. Cries over them, too. Though she'd kill me for telling you." The older woman sighed heavily. "I've seen a lot of broken souls in my time, young man. Hers is wounded, but not beyond repair. The question is whether you're strong enough to help put it back together, or whether you'll break it again. I would rather die than hurt her again." Pretty words. Easy to say. "Then tell me what to do. Tell me how to demonstrate it." Bronwyn was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her apron and withdrew a folded paper. "She's planning to leave tomorrow. Early morning coach heading south. I found this in her room. The schedule, the fare, the route. She's running again." The bottom dropped out of Kaylin's stomach. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because running won't save her, and because I think maybe you're the only thing that can." Bronwyn stood, brushing off her skirts. "But I swear to you, if you hurt that girl again, there won't be a place on earth far enough to hide you from me." She left him with the paper clutched in his hands, and a clock ticking down to his last chance. That night, Carenza couldn't sleep. She lay in her small room, surrounded by packed bags and the heavy weight of decisions, and felt the walls closing in. Tomorrow, she would run again. Find another village, another false name, another life built on foundation of sand. And she would spend the rest of her days wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. She had read his letters, all of them, each one more raw, peeling back another layer of the man she thought she knew. He wrote about his father's death, about the grief that had driven him to Lavinia's empty comfort. He wrote about his shame at not being honest with her from the beginning. He wrote about the moment he'd seen her arguing with that horse and felt his entire world shift. He wrote about love. Real love. The kind that made him afraid because losing it would wreck him. I should have fought for you in that ballroom. I should have called Lavinia a liar and taken you in my arms and let the whole world burn rather than watch you walk away. Instead, I let my fear of scandal matter more than your soul, and I will never forgive myself for it. You asked me to tell you she was lying, and in my hesitation, I told you everything you needed to know about my cowardice. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve another chance. But I'm asking for one anyway, because the alternative is a life without you, and I've already learned that such a life isn't worth living. I love you. I loved you before I knew what love meant. And I will love you for the rest of my days, whether you're beside me or 1,000 miles away. That's not a promise I'm making to win you back. It's simply the truth. And Carenza pressed the letters to her chest and sobbed until there was nothing left. She wanted to believe him. God help her. She wanted it so intensely that the wanting felt like physical pain. But belief meant trust, and trust meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant giving him the power to shatter her all over again. How did anyone survive this? How did anyone find the strength to love knowing how badly it could hurt? She thought of Bronwyn, rebuilding her life after her husband's betrayal, of Aldous, with his talk of grief and tides and learning to float, of her own mother, who had loved her father through poverty and failure and never once stopped believing in him. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe love wasn't about certainty or safety or protection from pain. Maybe it was about choosing to believe anyway, from choosing to trust despite the risk, choosing to be strong when every instinct screamed to run. But was she strong enough? As dawn began to lighten the sky outside her window, Carenza Hale honestly didn't know. The coaching inn at dawn was quiet, the yard empty except for a single mail coach being loaded for departure. Carenza approached it with her bag in hand, her mind numb, her decision made. She would run. It was safer. It was smarter. It was the only choice that made sense. But when she reached for the coach door, she found it blocked. Kalen stood before her, disheveled and exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed from sleepless nights. In his hands, he held not the confession she'd refused to take, but something else entirely. A book. Worn leather. Gilded pages. Familiar. This was my father's, he said quietly. His favorite volume. Jean Montaigne's collected essays. He read it to my mother during their courtship, and to me after she died. He used to say that true wisdom wasn't avoiding pain. It was understanding that pain and joy were inseparable halves of the same whole. Carenza stared at the book, uncomprehending. Why are you showing me this? Because I want you to have it. He extended it toward her. Not as a gift to win you back, not as a manipulation or a strategy, but because if you're going to leave, if you're going to disappear again and spend the rest of your life believing I betrayed you, I want you to carry something of mine with you. Something that matters. Kalen, I won't follow you. The words came out rough, broken. If you get in that coach, I won't chase you. I'll let you go, just like I should have let you decide from the beginning. But before you make that choice, I need you to know something." He sank to his knees in the muddy yard, heedless of his clothes, heedless of the coachman watching with wide eyes. "I love you, Carenza Hale. I loved you when you were arguing with a horse and insulting its courage. I loved you when you challenged my opinions and refused to be impressed by my title. I loved you in the greenhouse when you gave me your trust, even though every instinct told you not to. Please get up. I failed you. I know that. I let fear make me hesitate when I should have fought. I let pride keep me silent when I should have been honest. And I will spend the rest of my life regretting those failures, whether you forgive me or not." Tears were streaming down her face now. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you deserve to know the truth before you decide. Not from a piece of paper. Not from letters left with strangers. From me, on my knees, with nothing to offer but my word and my devotion." He reached into his pocket and withdrew Lavinia's confession, laying it in the mud before him like a sacrifice. "This demonstrates the child isn't mine. This demonstrates I was the victim of a scheme designed to tear us apart. But even without it, even if you never believe a word I've said, I need you to know that I choose you. I will always choose you. And if you walk away right now, I will spend whatever years I have left trying to become the man you thought I was when you first trusted me." The coach driver cleared his throat awkwardly. "Miss, we need to depart." Carenza looked at the coach, at freedom, safety, escape from everything that frightened her. Then she looked at Kalen, at his muddied knees and anguished eyes, and the book he was offering like a piece of his soul. And she made her choice. "Wait," she said to the driver. She picked up the confession from the mud, read it carefully. Every word, every damning detail of Lavinia's deception. Looked at the signatures, the witness marks, the official seal. Then she looked at the man still kneeling before her. "Get up," she said softly. "Not until you tell me whether I should keep believing." She reached down and took his face in her hands, lifting it toward hers. "Get up, you ridiculous man. You're ruining your clothes." The relief that blazed across his features was almost too much to bear. "Carenza, I haven't forgiven you yet." Her voice shook. "I'm still angry and hurt and afraid. But I'm also tired of running, tired of pretending I don't love you. I'm tired of being too scared to find out if this is real." "It's real." He rose to his feet, covering her hands with his own. "I swear on my father's memory. This is the realest thing I've ever known." "Then show me." She met his eyes with a challenge that was also an invitation. Not with grand gestures or anguished speeches. Show me day by day, moment by moment, for as long as it takes. "I will." He pressed his forehead to hers. "I'll show you for the rest of my life if that's what it takes." "It might." "Then so be it." The coach departed without her, and standing in the muddy yard of a coaching inn at the edge of nowhere, Carenza Hale and Kalen Thorne began the long journey back to each other. 3 weeks later, the Dowager Duchess Honoria had prepared for battle. She had arranged the drawing room of Ashworth Manor like a general arranging a battlefield. Every chair positioned for advantage, every window angled to illuminate weakness, every servant instructed on exactly when to enter with tea and when to disappear. Now she watched as Carenza Hale entered the room and found herself unexpectedly impressed. The girl was different. Still the same sharp intelligence in those hazel eyes, but tempered now with something harder. She had survived heartbreak and emerged stronger, and she walked into the Dowager's domain not as a supplicant seeking approval, but as a woman who had already decided her own worth. "Miss Hale," the Dowager gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." "Your Grace." Carenza sat, her posture perfect, her gaze unwavering. Thank you for agreeing to see me. You asked to speak with me privately, without my grandson. I confess I'm curious as to why. Because what I have to say is for you, not him. Carenza folded her hands in her lap. And because I won't begin a marriage, if there is to be a marriage, with deception between us. The dowager's eyebrow rose. Go on. You don't approve of me. You've made that clear from the beginning, and I understand why. I have no fortune, no family of significance, no connections that could benefit your grandson. By every measure society uses, I'm unsuitable. You've summarized the situation accurately. But here's what you may not realize. Carenza leaned forward slightly. I don't care about his title, and I didn't fall in love with the Duke of Ashworth. I fell in love with a man who quoted philosophy to horses and spoke of his father with tears in his eyes and looked at me like I was worth protecting. The dowager's expression flickered almost imperceptibly. He broke my trust, Carenza continued. Whether through cowardice or conspiracy or both, he let me walk out of that ballroom believing I meant nothing to him. And if I'm honest, part of me hasn't forgiven him yet. Part of me may never fully let go of that wound. Then why are you here? Because I've learned something in the week since I fled. Running from pain doesn't make it stop. Protecting yourself from love doesn't make you safe. It just makes you alone. Her voice steadied. I love your grandson. Against all reason, despite everything, I love him. And I believe he loves me. That may not be enough for you, but it's enough for me. And if I refuse to give my blessing, then we'll manage without it. Carenza's chin lifted. I don't need your approval to know my own worth, your grace. And Kalen doesn't need your blessing to know his own soul. We would both prefer your support, but we won't beg for it. Silence stretched between them, sharp as a blade. Then, slowly, the dowager smiled. Do you know what I learned from my own marriage, Miss Hale? I married for duty. An arrangement between families, negotiated like a business transaction. I expected nothing and received exactly that for 15 years. She paused, something shifting in her ancient eyes. Then I watched my son marry for love, watched him choose a woman everyone said was unsuitable. Watched him build a life that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with joy. And when she died, I watched him choose to honor that love every day for 20 years, rather than settle for another practical arrangement. Carenza's throat tightened. Kalen told me about them. He carries his father's capacity for devotion, though he'd never admit it. And perhaps he's found someone worthy of that inheritance. The dowager studied her with new assessment. I spent decades believing duty was enough. My son taught me otherwise, and I was too proud to admit it until he was gone. She rose, moving to the window. You have my blessing. Not because I approve of your station or connections, but because you have spine, and because my grandson needs someone who will fight for him as fiercely as he fought for you. Carenza felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you, Your Grace. Don't thank me yet. I reserve the right to be difficult, demanding, and thoroughly impossible for the remainder of my days. But the dowager's eyes held a warmth that belied her words. Welcome to the family, Miss Hale. God help us all. The door burst open, and Kalen appeared, his face wild with anxiety. Is everything all right? I heard voices. Everything is fine, the dowager said tartly. Your future wife and I were simply coming to an understanding. Kalen's eyes flew to Carenza. Future wife? If you'll still have me. She rose, crossing to him. I believe I owe you an answer to a question you asked several weeks ago. The answer is yes. He pulled her into his arms. And the answer has always been yes. The answer will be yes for the rest of our lives. I haven't asked yet. Then ask. She smiled through her tears. Caelan Thorne, Duke of Ashworth. Will you marry me? Yes. He kissed her, thorough and deep and full of promise. 1,000 times, yes. Behind them, the Dowager Duchess quietly slipped from the room, leaving them to their happiness. And if anyone noticed the suspicious brightness in her eyes, they were wise enough not to mention it. 1 month later, the Ashworth Ball. The ballroom that had witnessed Carence's greatest humiliation now glittered with the promise of vindication. Word had spread throughout London society. Lord Cresswell had been publicly exposed as the architect of the scandal, his reputation destroyed, his seat in Parliament lost, but Lavinia Marchand had vanished to the continent, her scheme unraveled, her future uncertain. And the Duke of Ashworth was hosting a ball to introduce his future Duchess to the world. Everyone who mattered had come. Everyone who had whispered and judged and delighted in scandal now gathered to witness something far more powerful. Love triumphant over malice. Carence stood at the top of the grand staircase in a gown of deep blue silk that matched the sapphires at her throat, the Ashworth family jewels placed there by the Dowager Duchess herself with grudging ceremony. Her hair was arranged simply, her manner calm, her pulse racing beneath a composed exterior. Beside her, Caelan took her hand. "Ready?" he murmured. "No." She squeezed his fingers. "But I'm doing it anyway." They descended together, and the ballroom fell silent. Carence felt hundreds of eyes tracking their progress. The matrons who had whispered behind their fans, the lords who had wagered on how quickly the scandal would consume her, the young ladies who had hoped to claim Caelan for themselves. She met their gazes directly, refusing to flinch. At the base of the staircase, Caelan turned to face the assembled crowd. His voice carried to every corner of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor of presenting my future wife, Miss Carence Hale. Some of you witnessed our engagement announcement last month and the events that followed. I won't rehearse the details of the conspiracy that was perpetrated against us. That story has been told thoroughly enough." His hand tightened on hers. "What I will say is this. The woman beside me is the strongest, most remarkable person I have ever known. She survived public humiliation, fled from pain, rebuilt herself from nothing, and still found the willingness to love again. I spend every day trying to be worthy of that gift." He turned to face her fully, and the crowd faded away. "I failed you once, Carence. I let fear and pride matter more than your soul. I won't fail you again. From this moment forward, my life is yours. My title, my fortune, my future, all of it is meaningless without you. You are my everything, and you are mine." Her voice was steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "I choose you, Caelan. Not your title or your wealth or your position. I choose the man who kneels in mud to show his love, the man who argues philosophy with stubborn horses, the man who gave me his father's favorite book because he wanted me to carry something of him, even if I never came back." She reached up to touch his face. "I choose you. Today, tomorrow, forever." The applause that erupted was thunderous, but neither of them heard it. They were lost in each other, in a kiss that sealed promises and announced to the world that love had won. 1 year later, the library at Ashworth Manor had become their sanctuary. Carence sat curled in her favorite chair, a book open in her lap, watching her husband pore over estate accounts at his desk. Evening light slanted through the windows, turning everything golden. "You're staring," Caelan said without looking up. "I'm observing. There's a difference." "Ah, yes, the educational excuse." He set down his pen, crossing to kneel beside her chair. "What have you learned from your observations?" "That you still furrow your brow when you find a discrepancy, that you carry tension in your shoulders when you're worried, that you're going to be a wonderful father." His hand moved to rest on the gentle swell of her belly, wonder in his eyes. A father. It still doesn't seem real. Give it a few months. The crying will convince you. He laughed, the sound warm and free, so different from the controlled man he'd been when they first met. "I love you, you know." "I know. You've shown me every day for a year. And I'll show you every day for the rest of our lives." She pulled him up for a kiss, soft and sweet and full of promise. Later, as they dressed for dinner with the Dowager, Carenza found herself thinking about the moment that had changed everything. Not the ballroom, not the accusation, not the night she'd walked away believing she'd lost everything. The stable yard, a stubborn horse. A stranger who'd crouched to check its hoof and taught her that most creatures were difficult for reasons. "What are you thinking?" Kaelin asked, watching her reflection in the mirror. "About how we met, that ridiculous horse who wouldn't move." He smiled, crossing to wrap his arms around her from behind. "You were magnificent, standing there, hands on hips, comparing her to elderly blind cats. You were insufferable, appearing out of nowhere, solving problems I didn't ask you to solve. You loved it. I did not." But she was smiling. "I found you annoying and presumptuous and entirely too handsome for your own good. And now?" She turned in his arms, facing him. "Now I find you annoying and presumptuous and entirely too handsome for your own good. But I've decided to keep you anyway. How generous. I'm a very generous person." He kissed her, and she melted into him the way she always did, the way she always would. Their story hadn't been easy. It had been painful and filled with mistakes. But standing here now, the library that had witnessed their first real conversation, with his child growing inside her and his ring on her finger, Carenza knew one truth with absolute certainty. Love was worth the risk. It always had been. And it always would be.